Welcome to the Regenaissance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Griggs. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more. Hello, everyone. My name is Ryan Griggs. I'm the host of the Regenaissance Podcast. Today, alongside me is the food manufacturing guy. Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This is great.
So, to get started, just for the listeners, I've been following food manufacturing guy for a little bit on Twitter, and what I've really enjoyed is him breaking down the whole world of this, as it's something that's huge in our food system, but it's something that's not really talked about. And I made a post probably 1 to 2 weeks ago when Siete, the really big brand that started in Austin, Texas, where I'm actually at, they made all of their products grain free and not using seed oils. And I've been using their products for a lot of years. And then I saw that they sold to Pepsi Co for $1.2 billion, which I do not fault them whatsoever for doing that. But it's just really interesting to see all of the articles and all of the comments just being shared about this. And I can understand both sides because on one side, there's been companies in the past that have been making products the right way and then they've sold out, or not sold out. I don't want to say sold out because that's a negative implication. They sold their company, um, for example, like Epic, and then within 2 years, all of their products are just awful and their jerky is just so dry, and for the price it's actually quite infuriating. But then on the flip side, we have another company like Primal Kitchen, to where they have sauces that are very legit, clean ingredients, no seed oils. And Mark Sisson, the founder, sold that. But then I know he's been very outspoken on the type of agreement he had, to where all the products are still the same. They've brought new products out to the market, and that's just incredible. So I guess, to get started, um, if you can just tell a little bit about just your background and then also just your thoughts on just the whole Siete ordeal.
Yeah, sure. So I've been in the food space for many years, both on the retail side and on the manufacturing side. And our mix of products that we do is pretty wide, largely frozen in the CPG space, so in the grocery store, some wholesale. But look, what this comes down to is, and I think you kind of started to hit the nail on the head there, is the founder or the seller of their brand, what they put into the contract and what they put into the agreement with the purchasing company. So if we look at Siete Foods, like most CPG companies, from what I understand, don't manufacture their own products. They are basically a marketing company. Marketing, they do some sales, right? So what they're doing is coming up with the recipes, finding someone to make the product, brand it as Siete, push marketing dollars and and expand the product's reach within the grocery network. Siete Foods raised, I think, somewhere up to almost $100 million before the pandemic through VC to basically expand what they say is expand their platform. So I know I've seen a ton of different Siete products, different categories, different packaging types. All of those require different types of machines. So if you think, you know, a tortilla is much different than a queso, which is much different than a sauce, and they have a bunch of different co-manufacturers making their products and delivering it to the grocery stores. Selling, I think that's what everyone wants. I speak to a lot of founders in this space, and I've invested in a few startups, for lack of a better word. They're a little bit bigger than a startup, but a startup nonetheless. And they all want to push the sales and push the marketing and eventually get to a point where a bigger company will just eat them, right? And I think it depends on the purchaser. Like I said, what PepsiCo in this particular situation is looking at is PepsiCo has their own manufacturing plants. PepsiCo makes a lot of their products. And so can they plug different Siete products into their pre-existing network to either inexpensively make the product, or can they take the robust R&D team and, as you mentioned with Epic, change some ingredients that are cheaper that will ultimately drive the margin? And so we don't know what's going to happen. I think most of the time the purchasing company tries to lower the product cost and increase the margin. And, sometimes that works and people are okay with it. And other times that doesn't work.
Yeah, and that's the comments I've seen with Siete, especially given that one of the big things that they market is the fact that it's seed oil free, and then they use avocado oil. And then I would see a lot of the comments saying that, oh, they're going to start cutting those oils, or yeah, just finding workarounds with that. So I find that interesting. I guess my question with that too, I'm trying to figure out how to frame this question. I guess my next question with all of this too, just with the sheer ingredients, this is a pretty broad question, but I think this could just dive into a little bit of the history of just the manufacturing world too. How have we gotten to this point in the food system to where, I mean, all the products, not all the products, majority of the products are just full of garbage, and the fact that that's just allowed. It just boggles my mind that I will see so many products now, and I look at the back and there's food coloring dyes and petroleum oil derived ingredients, all kinds of gums and emulsifiers, and it just wreaks havoc on all your body. I'm just kind of astounded just how we've gotten to that point, just to where, again, you walk into a grocery store, and if you could spend 30 minutes just looking at every single product, and it will just blow your mind at how much of it is fake.
Now, I
Uh,
mean, it's a good question, right? And I think if you boil it down, and it's a very complicated issue, it's culture. It's a cultural issue that in America, we culturally accept these types of products. If you were to take these products to another country, most of the time they wouldn't sell very well because culturally they don't accept that. That's like the very basic answer. Now, if you want to back up into it, you say, what are all these different ingredients doing to the product itself? Pretty much making it easier, quicker, more uniformly produced at the plant level, right? So an emulsifier or a gum, a thickening agent, instead of having to boil down liquid to make it a sauce, I can add water, I can add flavoring powder and an emulsifier and a thickener to make it a sauce in, 10 minutes, what would otherwise take multiple hours to boil down and reduce. That all goes to pretty much efficiency and margin drivers. And you say, okay, well, who's pushing the buttons there? And it's the stock market. Most of these food companies are publicly traded, particularly the big ones. And it really comes down to shareholder value. So you can start to put the pieces together and say, okay, well, we have a cultural issue. We have a food system driven by profits. And lastly, we have a lack of regulation. Most of these ingredients you're seeing in various food items and new ingredients fall under something called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. I'm not sure if you've seen this. It plays its hand in pharmaceuticals, it plays its hand into makeup and a couple other industries. It's basically a self industry regulated term that if you derive a product from something previously recognized as safe, that product therefore becomes safe. The most, I guess, the newest example that I've seen of this is there's a protein bar. I'm not sure if you've seen it called David.
no, I've not heard that.
Yeah, it's been on. I've seen it come on X a couple times. Basically, in that protein bar, there is something called plant fat, and derived an oil based kind of process that pulls out fat from oil, vegetable oil, plant oil, turns it into semi solid state, and that's used as another a better, maybe better, I don't know, it's kind of hard to determine, but an alternative fat in a protein bar. That product is really new on the market, the ingredient. I think it's been on the market for a couple years now, heavily processed, obviously not a natural product. Plant fat, it's not a natural product that doesn't exist in nature, but it falls under generally recognized as safe. And so no one has to test it or regulate it. Some food dyes are like that. There's a bunch of ingredients that, someone long time ago set the precedent for the ingredient, and then you just keep building off of it. And it's not illegal, it's legal. You start to see things like in California where they're putting in laws for food dyes and other additives. I mean, ultimately, while I'm not a pro regulation person in general, probably where we need to go, um, especially with some of the really harmful chemicals that are entering the food system.
So I just Googled that protein bar, and this is actually wild. I've never seen a nutrition fact breakdown like this. With the ingredients, they broke down the ingredients to four different categories. I'm just going to explain this to the listeners because this is actually wild. They have the ingredients broken down. So the first category is protein system, and they have milk protein isolate, collagen, whey protein concentrate, and then egg white, which sounds all right. And then they have under that the category binding system. And this is wild too with this allulose, polydextrose, glycerin, tapioca starch, and then lecithin. I mispronounced that word. And then under that, as you described, they have the fat system, and that's the modified plant fat and coconut oil. And then fourth, they have their own category for flavor system, which is unsweetened chocolate, natural flavor, monk fruit extract, stevia glycos. I can't even I can't even pronounce that word. Glycosides, and then cocoa powder. So now it just seems like the fact that we're having so many ingredients added to these products that they're literally breaking it down to their own categories, and I've never actually seen that before.
No, me neither. And I think it's an interesting way to do it. I mean, if you break down what those ingredients were, the protein system's pretty, like you said, pretty normal.
Hmm.
Allulose is a low calorie sugar. So it adds sugar, sweetness, but doesn't increase your blood sugar. Polydextrose is a synthetic glucose. So it's kind of a filler and stabilizer. Glycerin is a syrup, kind of the same, similar to allulose, but it adds moisture to the product. Tapioca starch is a thickening agent. Soy lecithin binds oil and water, so there's no separation. Obviously, oil and water don't naturally mix. You need some sort of emulsifier to create cohesion. Modified plant fat, as I described, it's an engineered fat. It's new, relatively new on the market. I've never used it. I've actually never seen it in a product before, so this is interesting. Coconut oil, the flavor system, you know, two highlights or three highlights. Natural flavor is an extremely generic ingredient. There is no way you know what's in that ingredient, right? I mean, whether you see natural flavor or artificial flavor in your ingredient statement, it could actually be a million different things. It's just a generic ingredient, and there's no way to find out what is actually in that ingredient. Monk fruit extract is the extract from monk fruit. It's calorie free sweetener. And then steviol is basically just stevia.
So my question then with the natural flavors, can you just explain that then? The fact that, like you were saying, there's no way to really verify it. How do they go about adding their natural flavor into a product?
Y- it could be a variety of ways. So basically, the distinguishing factor between natural and artificial flavor is a particular percentage of natural ingredient. So And that then classifies it under natural versus artificial. Artificial flavorings, things like um, it's more chemical based. There's a ton of flavoring companies, ingredient companies out there that make pretty much any kind of flavor you want in a natural or artificial manner. Most of the time, it's a liquid. So it's some sort of flavoring additive that is bound in a kind of alcohol based liquid. So, you go to the store, you see vanilla extract or you see vanilla in a liquid bottle. Some of them will say natural, the more expensive ones. The cheaper ones will have artificial flavorings in addition to the natural vanilla flavor and some sort of alcohol to bring out the oil or essence of the spice or whatever you're using to turn it into this flavoring. But because there are so many flavorings out there, and because most of the time the flavor or the spice mix or whatever is kind of unique to that product, it differentiates it from a competitor. Most people and most companies just lump everything into natural flavor or artificial, which whatever bucket it falls into. There are certain spices that you have to call out, like paprika. You'll always see paprika called out in an ingredient statement if it's included. There are a few others, but for the most part, it's kind of a catch all for whatever flavoring system you're using.
Then what would be the difference then for labeling the product artificial versus natural flavor?
Pretty much the percentage of natural ingredient in that flavor category or whatever. Um, I don't know offhand what the percentage is. I can look it up quickly as we continue, but yeah, it's pretty much just, does it is it derived from a natural source like vanilla, or is it derived from an artificial chemical based source that mimics natural flavor?
That makes sense. Then I guess just transitioning a little bit, going and just comparing the manufacturing world in America versus say Europe. And then I know mentioning previously about just the lack of regulation, which is interesting because on the flip side, for other parts of our food system, there's a lot of regulation, say for raw milk, for example. I'm just curious, what are, because with so many ingredients, such as a lot of the dyes, it's completely illegal in Europe. And then you go on social media and there's all kind, I've made posts myself on showing, uh, say like, I'm trying to think of the examples that I have. One of the examples would be like Fanta orange soda, and they show the ingredients and how bright orange it is in America, and then comparing that to the sun or the that in UK, and it's still orange but way less, and then the ingredients are vastly different. Moving
Yeah,
forward,
I
I guess
mean,
where do you see this heading? Because I guess with so many new ingredients just constantly happening, trying to increase the profit margins with the products, but also trying to have it, I guess, taste good and sell well. But then on the flip side, we have Pepsi Co buying Siete and all these other healthy, quote unquote, healthier brands. I guess where do you see this going?
it's a good question. I don't know. If you say, obviously the European Union has really strict or stricter regulation on what's allowed and not allowed. Will the US get to that point? I don't know. Obviously, we have lobbying groups and different interest groups involved in the legal process of getting laws and bills passed. I don't know if that's going to happen. I think there definitely is a consumer driven demand for more transparency and for healthier alternatives. But for the most part, those healthier alternatives are much more expensive. So only so many consumers are going to demand that. it kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning. Is there's, I love going to Italy, to France, to various other countries, and every time I go, I take a cooking class. I think you can learn a lot about a culture and about an area based on the food that they make and the process that they use to make it. Pretty much every single time I do that, whether whatever country it is, whether in Africa or Europe or Asia, the process to make a meal takes a long time, right? They're boiling things, they're cooking, reducing, vegetables for hours and hours and hours. And that's what they grew up with, is a meal is not a quick eat and let's move to the next thing. It's something that's savored, it's nourishment, it's a social time. Um, it's not a fast food driven culture. And we in America definitely have that. So changing culture takes a long time. I think obviously there are things that the consumer can do that will speed that process up, like purchasing a Siete product over an alternative, you know, garbage ingredient product. But I don't know. If you fast forward 15 or 20 years, where are we? I think we've made progress a little bit, but I don't think we're to the
Yeah,
point of
and
a
that's
of an EU regulated food industry.
I'm glad that you've just been talking about the culture aspect because I mean that's honestly why I mean one of the reasons I have this brand is to me one of the biggest issues in America that we face behind why 75% of this country is pretty much obese or severely obese is the fact that we're so disconnected from our food. I mean, you bring up the example of Italy, and that's the always the prime example that we use, especially whenever folks go over to Italy. They feel so much better, and there's so many reasons why, and that's because their culture has been so ingrained with their food, um, and that's it's just tough in America because I'm a huge capitalist at heart, but then in America that's turned into where we're at now. I mean, you can argue that's not technically capitalism, but crony capitalism, but uh, yeah, our food system has just strewn so far away into max efficiencies, max yields, max profits, and all for the shareholders and the higher ups, and the ones that are getting destroyed is just the common folks, and most aren't aware of what's really happening, and most aren't aware of, say, a bag of chips that they had as a kid, just the types of ingredients, how much it's changed. Because even I mean, in the '90s, growing up, I had an awful diet. My first, I don't know, 17 years of living, I was pretty overweight, and that's simply because breakfast was Pop Tarts, lunch was pretty much garbage. After school, after sports, I would go home and eat chips and soda and just so much garbage that makes it so difficult to break that chain of habit. That's why I try to help too with this is such a massive problem to tackle the food system and your health, just because the fact all these products with all these different ingredients now literally rewires our brain and makes you crave those foods that will make you hungry in an hour rather than having a steak where you feel satiated for way longer than that. Um, I'm just curious too, with going back to the Siete example, it kind of gives me hope in a way seeing such a large corporation buying one of these and seeing the demand for these products. So I'm curious with that too. Do you see any other companies just trying to, especially with regenerative agriculture really starting to pick up steam? I mean, I heard about this term 2 years ago, and just seeing in the last year how quickly that's grown. How how could others really? I'm trying to really figure out this question too, because I also always go back to with the food system itself. It's never going to change unless we change how we use our dollar.
Yep.
It just
Yeah, I
seems
mean
like
it's
I'll let you talk.
no, yeah, I think you bring up good points, right? It's largely education, it's largely habits that are formed while we're still in our parents' household. And how do you educate kids on making better choices? I don't know the current lunch program is the right way, right? I mean, I haven't been in a school in a long time, but from everything that I see, most of the choices for lunch are not very healthy. And the habits that are formed as kids or young adults often grow and become solidified in our life as we continue those habits. It takes a lot, it's a lot harder to break it than to teach it from the beginning. But at the end of the day, the consumer's dollar is the most powerful thing. And I think more people have to understand that. You vote with your dollar, right? You don't vote with a post on X or a Facebook post or a comment card, right? That doesn't really mean much when the dollar is what rules, and that's what rules here. If parents, consumers are going out and saying it's important to me to work towards a better future for my kids, I'm going to buy this product over that product. And as we saw, not to get political, but as we saw with the Budweiser, Bud Light sponsorship thing that they went through, the dollar mattered, and it really changed the way Bud Light went about their marketing. That's a real time example to a pretty high degree of what you can do as an everyday consumer.
And that goes back to the marketing too, because that's another challenge um, in America is the fact that we're bombarded constantly with ads, with just all the marketing tactics, like fast food, for example. There's a lot of research behind why they use the colors they use, the topography they use to try to just lure you in. And that's the same thing with all of the products you find in grocery stores. Of it's interesting that you bring up lunch because then that reminds me of Lunchly that just was launched by three famous YouTubers, Mr. Beast, KSI, and Logan Paul, and they're marketing their garbage product as a better alternative to Lunchables, which is hilarious because that's like the equivalent of telling my mother I got a 30% on my test and I came back and got a 40%. Technically, I did better, but still, I did terrible. Because if you look up Lunchly, the drink they have is the Prime drink that is the founders from KSI and Logan Paul, which has really fallen short. And then Mr. Beast chocolate, which is technically better than a lot of the chocolates that you can buy in stores. But he's already changed the ingredient list of that because the first one he released with that was actually pretty dang solid. And then he already changed it and added some ingredients that I don't agree with. And then lastly, the whole actual Lunchable, the ingredients full of soybean oils and emulsifiers. I saw you post too, breaking down the ingredients of that. It's it's really difficult from the awareness sake too because there's just so much marketing pushed. I mean, this whole Lunchly thing really made me sick to my stomach because these are three really big YouTubers that market all of their brands, personal brands, to the children. That's how they got so famous. And now they're deliberate. I don't. To me, they're deliberately lying. They're trying all of kinds of ways to make it okay what they're doing. Um,
I
I,
think you're giving them too much credit, to be honest with you. I don't think they're the ones behind this, right?
okay, that's good.
If
That's
you
actually a
think
good point.
about it, yeah, I mean, so pick any one of them. In the beginning, it was all them, right? They worked hard, and whether you agree with their channel, message, method, whatever, they built a following for themselves. At some point, some commercialization arm or company or person came into their life and said, "Hey, we can take you from level 1 to level 5 or whatever. Here's what we're going to do." And part of that is different projects, food products, um, collaborations. There's a lot of things, and they become kind of a machine while the individual themselves is just a talking piece for the machine. So, yes, as you mentioned, if you go to my X account, it's at Tip of the Banana. I break down a ton of products with ingredients and things like that. But I don't think these guys are going and huddling in a meeting and say, let's do this. I think there's teams of people behind them giving them options of things that they can do, and some stick and some don't. I think the prime example is kind of a tale that is almost done telling itself. Is they brought out this product that really is no different than any other product on the market. It's not better for you. It's not. It doesn't have less ingredient. It's basically the same. That's what's out there. Maybe some will argue even worse. It was popular for a brief moment, and now they're getting sued because they overcommitted to production targets from the co-man. And so, if you take that example and you say, okay, well, what's going to happen to Lunchly? I would probably say something very similar. You also have to think Prime as a brand is trying to find ways to utilize this stock that they're going to have to pay for. So I think it was 60 million. It might even be more. I don't remember the number off the top of my head. But they have to take that product or pay for the product and not utilize it. So if I'm behind Prime and I'm in Logan Paul, I think it's Logan, right? It's not Jake, is it?
Yeah, it's Logan Paul.
If I'm in his corner, I'm saying, hey, how can we utilize the liquid in various different ways to try go through it? And you're going to probably see even more collaborations coming down the road as the pressure builds for them to write that check.
That actually makes a lot of sense. I think that could go into just the economics of this all then, because like you've mentioned previously, trying to do it the right way with clean ingredients is costly, and so the product's going to cost a lot more. I mean, for example, I've learned this with my brand because from the start with apparel, I mean, I learned just like other industries, it's pretty destroyed in terms of the actual economics of it all. A lot of people utilize China with just cheaply made products because the margins are so slim. And I tried to go about it the right way of from the beginning, trying to find good natural fibers and trying to have the fact that it's American made. And fortunately, I had one good supplier that I was able to find, but then I get comments all the time on the price of my products, and it's a huge awareness problem just talking about why my shirt costs $40 rather than say a Nike shirt you could get for 15 bucks. There's so much behind all of that. And so I'm just curious if we can just talk about that from the manufacturing side, because I would assume that the fact that it's so costly and having to try to market towards people as to why your product costs more than typical um, similar product, I would assume that just starting that is so difficult, especially with the fact a lot of these products now have so many garbage ingredients to just make it cheaper for higher profit margins. Say someone wants to do this the right way from beginning to finding the manufacturing and all that. How could they go about that?
Yeah, I get that question asked a lot, and there are a few ways to go about it. So the first is have really deep pockets. Be willing and have the means to bring a product to commercialization, which is very expensive. And once it's in commercialization, pay for the marketing dollars to get it on the grocery store shelf. That's the easiest step if you have the means to do it. The other way, and what I recommend the most, is dial in your product through local farmers market or some sort of local market type environment where you can get direct customer feedback and you can see and talk to people about the brand. Obviously, that's not going to translate when you go into grocery, but that helps to kind of build a, a business case, for lack of a better word, on why the product is the way it is, and what your value add is to that product. From there, once you have, small base of customer, it's a lot easier to make the decision on whether you're going to, you know, get space in a shared kitchen and self manufacture, or slowly climb the ladder of co-mans, starting with the small co-man, moving to a medium and maybe a large as the product gets more distribution. But what it ultimately comes down to in the economics of the food world is, from the raw material to the grocery store, there's a lot of touching and there's a long lead time between each step, right? So if we think about a product, and let's take a fruit product, right? Most of the fruits are not grown in the US, so it's grown in another country. It has to be picked. It can't be picked too early or too late because it's going to spoil. So it's picked earlier than it should. It gets touched, classified, put onto a cargo ship, landed in a port, driven to a warehouse, stored, driven to another warehouse that goes to a grocery store, and then delivered to the grocery store. And then you get it as a consumer. Okay, well, that process can take a really long time, right? It depends on the product, but that can take a really long time. So if you say, what are the economics behind it, is there are so many steps in the process, and everyone has to take, money, hopefully a profit from each step, that things just become really expensive really quick. And if you say, I want to do it the right way, I think, power to you. You're going to run into issues a lot of the time, particularly because of the chain of events. Grocery stores require a specific amount of shelf life, right? And so if you're saying it's a fresh product, a refrigerated product, or a bakery item, they're going to want a couple weeks of shelf life from when it gets delivered to them, so that they can either warehouse it, ship it out, or put it on the shelf and it doesn't spoil before it's sold. That's what really your biggest problem of when you say, I want to do a product without preservatives or various agents. It's the shelf life, right? You're incentivized as a food company to make sure that grocery store doesn't have, out of date items. Most of the time, or a lot of the time, when they do go out of date, the grocery store comes back and says, hey, you shipped me a product that only lasted 5 days, 10 days. Can you pay for that? And so that's 100% loss on that product.
See, that's also interesting too. I'm wondering, do you have an example of a company that starting out wanted to do the right way? And this is not even before saying they would sell and make an exit. I'm just curious if you have an example of a company trying to do it the right way from the beginning, but then as time goes on, they started, changing the formulas to have worse ingredients.
I don't think you get to that point. I think people in a small circle say, I want to do it the right way, but to get it into the grocery store, I think you have to change that mindset before it even makes it to that point. Just because what I just described, all the different steps and lead time in it. Now, changing ingredients happens pretty frequently. Lot of the time when a brand is sold, you'll see ingredients change, just because the purchaser either has better buying power on specific ingredients that they can substitute, or they're trying to, manipulate the margins and not change the taste of the product too much. But I don't think there are many examples of companies saying and getting into distribution and then changing mid growth.
Yeah, no, that makes sense too. Um, I'm trying to think if I had other questions based off of that. I guess my last question with all of this too, because you've mentioned so many of the touch points, with it being so capital intensive and already, because obviously with a lot of these products, say for example chips, and I'll give the example of it's called masa chips. It's a very premium product of a tortilla chip, but that's because they try to find the highest quality tallow. They do it's a corn tortilla chip, but they use what's called nixtamalized corn, which is in I think an Aztec or Incan um, way of it's better for you in essence. And then they also use good quality salt, but the product is very expensive, and I will see the comments constantly on that. But then there's more to that story too. Is just the fact with agriculture as a whole is so jacked up to where, like you were saying, with fruits going imported so much. Same with a lot of our meats, and it's just mind-boggling with all of that to where we've in, import more than we export beef, which is mind-boggling in itself too, because we have enough land to where we don't even need to be doing that in the first place. Yet we have so much beef being imported from Brazil and Australia and New Zealand and Mexico, and so that whole world completely plays an effect of the manufacturing world and just trying to build these products again because there's so many different touch points, and with your margins are already so slim, grocery store margins are so slim in itself. Because I think with Walmart, I can't remember the statistic, but I remember if Walmart, if they like shut down for, I think it was like a week, most of our food system would be completely destroyed. Is that, do you know if that's, am I talking out of my ass there, or is that, have you heard of that or looked
I,
into it?
I wouldn't I wouldn't be surprised if that was true. Yeah, look, I think something I didn't fully realize that I had to realize rather quickly was Ukraine, that the Ukraine Russia area is what's known as the grain belt of the world. And because we live in such a globalized food system and really product system, when that war started, there was a huge supply issue of various grains that grew there, were processed, and then shipped around the country or around the world. And a large percentage of it was to or is to the US. And so I didn't really fully understand that. But when the war started, we had a ton of supply issues related to various grains that were from that part of the world. So we had to figure out and find alternative of products, sometimes more expensive, to make it through the supply issue. And I say that just to point out, it's truly a globalized food system that we're living in. Not necessarily always for the worse. It makes more products more accessible to people. It most of the time decreases the price of these products, but you do run into supply issues, and it's rather crazy that the bread or the flour that I'm using for this bread is made, grown, produced out of a country I've never even been to. Right? It's mind-boggling. But to kind of back it up to the masa chip thing you were talking about, yeah, I mean, when you make a product, and chips are a little different because it's a shelf stable product. And so, shelf stable, you have a little bit more room to maneuver in. They're also using a particular type of packaging that I believe, I don't know if they have a moisture wicking insert in it or not, but they chose their packaging type to try get even more shelf life out of the product. But yeah, when you go with beef tallow over oils, seed oils, you go with organic corn over, regular corn. The cost of those ingredients really multiplies the end product cost to the consumer. And if you think about it, a grocery store's margin, your everyday grocery store, only makes about 2 or 3% margin on a product. That's a really, really low margin,
Yeah, that's
right?
so low.
If you asked anyone on X if they would open a business knowing that they're going to do $100 million in sales but only make 2%, most people would just say no, right? But that's the reality of the system we live in today. So
Man, 2 to 3%. That is. I guess I've never looked into that because I knew it was low, but I did not realize it was that low. And that just shows how just feeble the whole food system really is.
yeah, it's it just it's tough, right? I mean, I think some of the price markups that you're seeing are, I don't want to say taking advantage of a situation, but I think companies are seeing the ability to increase their margins through blaming various situations around the world as some sort of some sort of justification for trying to boost their margin. I don't remember which company it was, but it was a recent large S&P 500 company that just posted like record profits in the food space. I should know it, but pretty much their entire strategy the last couple of years has been, let's blame some situation around the world so that we can increase a couple points on each product over every quarter. And after a couple quarters, we'll be hitting record profits, and you're seeing some of that for sure. But yeah, it's a very tight market.
The greenwashing, there's a lot. I don't know if this was an example of greenwashing, but there is so much greenwashing that goes on with food. I mean, I even remember seeing you post recently on Vital Farms because they are just massive, but it's just so hard to verify any of this from the end consumer. Because, like for example, I bet most people that buy Vital Farms don't realize they probably think it's just like the Vital Farms farm, but don't realize that they have so many different egg suppliers.
Yeah, I mean, I think the penalty is worth the crime in a lot of the greenwashing situations. There's a great podcast on with Joe Rogan and a guy named Will Harris from Harris
Yeah.
Farms. I'm not sure if you've seen that one,
Hmm.
but he talks a lot about how, and he's a regenerative farmer. His beef is raised and on everything. It's all self-sustainable in his farm, kind of the four walls of his farm, which is great. He makes a ton of different products, um, but he was selling into Whole Foods, and it, he obviously describes it better than I'm describing it, but it's the verbiage that's used to describe what is quote unquote green and what isn't is very loose. It's in the gray area for sure. And at the end of the day, the penalty that's put upon a company greenwashing is not very big in comparison to whatever they're making on that product. So, you know, why not just do it and see what happens? It's yeah, it's tough. I'm interested to see what happens with Vital Farms because they really base their entire product and image on this premium egg product they've put out. And I've posted videos from them because it looks amazing from the video of how automated and how product focused they are as a company, only to find out that was just all marketing, right? So I'm interested to see what the penalty is for that. I think every time there is one of these massive greenwashing lawsuits, it kind of sets a new precedent moving forward. And from the consumer aspect, I think every consumer should say to themselves, I want the penalty to be as high as possible to try dissuade other companies from this process.
Yeah, can you actually explain what's going on with Vital Farms? Because I doubt most people have any idea what's going on with them.
Yeah, so from what I understand, so Vital Farms is one of the most expensive egg products in the supermarket, and they've based their whole egg business on pasture raised eggs, humane practices with their chickens, um, you know, being cage free and free range, and all the buzzwords that you can use to sell an egg. What's just come out in the last couple weeks is that their PETA has found that they use inhumane practices with their birds, and that they're actually not pasture raising their eggs like they've described. Now, I don't think it's not unique in that they source their eggs from different farms. I think in our food space today, pretty much all these big companies who are direct to the farmer are sourcing products from single, quote unquote, mom and pop farms that then they put into their system in brand as Vital Farms or Tyson, or pick a brand, right? Vital Farms could never and would never own all the farmland and all the chickens to produce, $500 million of eggs. That's just not feasible. So they say, okay, I'm going to go and find what they have now is 300 family farms that they pull product from, and to be qualified as a farm for Vital, you would have to hit these qualifications, right? Pasture raised, humane practices, certain type of feed, whatever their classification is. What's coming out now again is they're either not vetting properly, or they're turning a blind eye to some of the practices that these farms that they're sourcing from are doing. Obviously, this is all alleged until further, um, until we know more information. But I'm certainly going to be following along. And there's been tons of these greenwashing lawsuits. Even companies marketing products not in the food industry get in trouble for over emphasizing or using too many buzzwords to describe a green or sustainable product. And yeah, like we've been talking for the last hour, is if the consumer votes with their dollar, things will change.
Yeah, whenever you're saying the non-food products, it reminds me of Patagonia because they greenwash a lot that people really don't realize. They're, some of their products are so insanely expensive, but then you see the materials, and it's like nothing natural fiber and just cheaply made polyester. It's seeing that part has been very sad. Seeing companies such as that take advantage of again those buzzwords. But again, this is also why I continue to preach constantly to support your local farmers and ranchers, because that's literally the only way in today's society that you can truly verify that A, everything that they're doing is legit, and B, the products that you're buying from them is actually legit. There's really no other way. You go into a grocery store. I mean, with some of the beef, there was a study to where the amount of different types of DNA within a packet of ground beef were in the 40s or 50s, coming from different 40 or 50 different cows. And so again, that's I'll just end on that. That's why I always continue to preach that, because if you want to take control of your health, and if you have a family or spouse, take help each other out, it'd be simply by finding online through farm maps, or even just googling farms near you, or going to a local farmers market and really start thinking about these things, because uh, again, it's very hard to verify all the words and marketing tactics that are we're just throwing so much information, misinformation. Um, it's just wild to try to parse through it all if you've never actually taken the time to research it all. And so that's why, to me, the simplest way to bypass all that is just talking to a farmer, because it's a lifestyle for them, and they sacrifice so much to try to provide good quality food in a system that is making it very challenging for them to do so, and it's only becoming more challenging, which is why in the last 3 years we've lost nearly 7% of all farms and ranches, which is in itself very staggering. Because then you pair that with the fact that farms are really struggling to even maintain or even have a profit. So how are we going to get new farmers and ranchers into this space and actually try to disrupt the food industry? It always goes back to shake your rancher's hand and how you vote with your dollar.
Yeah, I agree. I think farmers markets are paramount. Again, look at the European model of procuring food as a consumer, right? You're going to your local outdoor market, right? That again, when I do these cooking classes and walk around various cities, they all have small markets throughout the city that have local ingredients. The product, they don't have a lot of products, so it's not a Walmart of grocery store. It's small. You can only get certain things that are in season. They have certain uh, proteins depending on where in the world you are. If you're close to a sea, you'll have a lot of seafood. If you're not, you won't. That's kind of the opposite of what we have in at mega stores that offer everything you can imagine, and you have infinite choice. So two different things, but yeah, I go to my local farmers market every weekend, and I think first of all, you meet some great people. They're very passionate, as you mentioned, about what they do, and you get to learn some things, right? Bef- if I were not in this industry, I obviously would not fully understand the whole system and the complications of the system and what you can and can't do and things like that. But you go talk to a farmer who they specialize in pork. They're going to tell you everything you need to know about what's in front of you, what you're purchasing, why it's you're buying this over that. You really learn a lot about the product, and you start to develop really appreciation for the food you're eating.
Absolutely agree. Well, thank you so much for joining. I guess before we go, if there's any last things you'd like to mention or plug, that would be a good time.
Yeah, no, like I mentioned, check me out on X at tip of the banana. I post on there pretty frequently. I've been trying to keep on brand with food items. Tag me if you see anything that you like broken down or more information on as you browse through the internet. My DMs are open. I talk to people all the time about new ideas or ways that they can get started in the food space, and I've got a ton of resources that you can use if you want to have more conversation and go deeper. In my bio, there's a Calendly link, and we can spend as much time as you want on your idea. So, yeah, thanks for having me. This has been a great discussion, and I look forward to more.
Awesome. Take care. Visit www.theregenaissance.co to learn more.